Hey there, welcome to episode 67 of the FFS Talk audio program. I'm your host, Dan Hugo. We're recording this at 7:15 p.m. on Thursday, March 6, 2025. I've been recording later in the evening this week. It's the way it is. Today we're going to talk about debugging. If you don't know what that is, I'll fill you in a little bit. If you do know what that is, I'm not going to talk about software. It's going to be about the general concept and applying it to life. Or things around us anyway. So yeah, there you go. FFS Talk. It's an audio program that's allegedly aimed at discussion with like more than one person about discussion about things that work, things that don't, and what we can do about it. I think I usually say what works and what doesn't. But either way, what can we do about it? It's supposed to be a constructive debate, maybe, conversation. So far, 67 episodes of video-free audio essay. One person talking, sprouting some ideas. Hopefully one or more of these episodes will lead to a discussion down the road. Either way, I have many things, many ideas, many things to talk about. So going solo is fine too. The FFS Talk audio program is named for an expression that some Irish people and some other people use. If you are not familiar with what FFS stands for, you need to hang out with more Irish people. It's that simple. Hopefully, wherever you have found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes. There is a summary, and there are 4 links, 2 of the usual shameless self-promotion, and 2 apropos for today's show. They're both Wikipedia links. You gotta love Wikipedia. I actually like Wikipedia, but as I always tell people, a journey in search of knowledge can begin at the Wikipedia, but it probably shouldn't end there. So let us begin. The summary of today's episode. Debugging is not something everyone does consciously, but we all do it in one way or another. It is about understanding the way something works and taking a close look to try to determine why it is not working. Like everything else, it is a skill that needs to be developed, which means knowing what you are doing, knowing that you are doing it, and knowing when you need to do it takes practice. I somehow did not have the takes practice part at the end. So I edited my notes on that note. As if you are a frequent listener to any of my audio programs, I prepare notes, I read from them, I also interject my own commentary. So I'm commenting on myself, and I will often edit typos as I find them. The links for today's episode include the 2 shameless self-promotion coffee-related production by Street, if you heard that. Coffee-related platforms that support or that enable supporting open source developers, content creators, and others with an audience or a fan base or just people they want to get in touch with. The first, buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo, has links to all of my audio programs, including this one, links to various projects, mostly on GitHub, links to my favorite coffee beans. You are not obligated to spend any money on either of these sites, by the way, although if you do, guess what? Coffee. Coffee is what powers the projects. I think there are 1 or 2 affiliate links. I know there's at least 1, maybe 2 at the bottom. And then way at the top, above the biographical information, a little bit about me, there is a link to the posts section. There is a buymeacoffee.com exclusive. I host a very brief microcast called Buy Me an Update. I publish it on Mondays. It's under 5 minutes. What were last week's episodes about? What's coming up this week as far as not audio programming necessarily, audio programming, but whatever's coming up, just things. One of these days I will announce websites, but they're just so low priority unless, I don't know if people need websites. I know websites will figure into some of my grander plans. Self-publishing, depending on Spotify, is never a good idea unless you have $1 million contract or something. So eventually, all these things will come together. But buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo, posts link at the top, also at the top of the webpage. I have not looked on the mobile app. I should. But you can get directly to the post section. I think we're coming up on episode 15. Or did we just do episode 15? I'll tell you in a second. So yeah, episode 15 was last week. Episode 16 obviously will be this week. Do check that out if you like. Again, it's updates about the stuff coming up through the week. And Ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/Dan Hugo. I pronounce it Ko-fi to emphasize that it's a Ko, Fi or Fi, really, Ko-Fi, Coffee.com, Dan Hugo. They do not support audio uploads. They don't host audio. I can link to audio, but not on buymeacoffee.com, from what I can tell. So textual updates there. So these two platforms, I've had them for quite a while. I use them for engaging the public. Hopefully that's you. On to the episode links, debugging, a Wikipedia page about debugging. If you've never heard the term debugging, that's interesting. There's always a bug. It's a bug, not a feature. It's a feature, not a bug, and so on. It's a term coined by, why am I totally spacing on her name? Admiral. I don't have the page open right now. Admiral. It'll come to me. Debug. It was a moth found in a Mark II computer. And Grace Hopper. Thank you. Jeez. I should know that like crazy. I didn't even look it up. It just came. I have to sometimes wait for my hard drive to spin up. Grace Hopper, Admiral Grace Hopper, infamously quotable character from the early days of computing. Super smart, very knowledgeable, good presenter. Somewhere there's a historical object, a moth taped to a page of notepaper, I think, or something. So actual bug. Technically, a moth is not a bug, I think. But a bug was found causing trouble in the old Mark II. Debugging is something of an art. It really gets easier with practice, and it's really about lateral thinking. It's about stateful thinking. It's about understanding how something works. It's about understanding how it works with other things. It's a good skill to have, and as I mentioned, we're doing it all the time. We just might not be aware of it. And we might not be particularly good at it, but we're usually trying to figure out why something is behaving or misbehaving or sounds weird or doing something strange or unexpected. And we try to figure it out. Now we'll probably look on the internets. Totally normal. And the extra link, it's kind of a bonus. It's not totally directly related, but kind of is. The Ship of Theseus. If you're not familiar with the Ship of Theseus, if you take a ship of Theseus or otherwise, and you slowly but surely replace everything in it. You can do the same with a home. You can do the same with, humans, living beings have cell replacement. There's cell turnover. So your skin is always regenerating, your organs, your everything in your body, for the most part. There are some things that don't. I think brain cells might be one. As your cells are regenerating and old cells are getting pushed out, autophagy, you can ask yourself, am I the same person after all of my cells have been replaced? The Ship of Theseus, same thing. If the ship is replaced part by part, is it eventually not the same ship, or is it the same ship? It's one of those philosophical questions. It's also practical, as we'll see in my practical example. So what is this? What is this? As a computer engineer, mostly software, but hardware also, I have had occasion on many times, professionally and even personally, to try to solve some problem with regard to computers, computer something, software, hardware. So specifically related to my profession. At Philips, it was getting our new display controller to display pixels on a flat display. At Intel, it was powering up a new maker board. At TrueVision, it was making dual stream video appear without tearing on an edit screen. The list goes on. Sometimes those things didn't work and we had to make them work. So either it is a new thing and it has not worked yet. So we're kind of figuring out what do we need to solve this roadblock issues, issue or issues, so that we reach that eureka moment. It works. Or it was working and now it is not. Probably due to a change during ongoing development, but who knows? That is what we need to determine. I think everyone at this point has experienced the update, the latest version of your phone operating system or whatever. The latest version fixes some bugs, introduces some new ones. And then the whole process begins again. Oh, what did we break? What do we got to figure out this time? The same sort of thing applies to just about everything. Does your car make a strange noise when you drive over a bump? Does your phone restart itself sometimes for no apparent reason? Do your lights flicker in the evening, but not during the day? got to fix that. I said, do your lights flicker? That's a weird one when things only happen at some times of the day. I have a fun one for that, which I'll interrupt myself. Does your new dessert recipe taste strange suddenly? Or maybe even bad? Working the bugs out is a real thing. And now you know the origin of that term. We can hope that you do not have real bugs in your food, for example. So here's a time of day one that was sort of funny. When I was living in Phoenix, in sort of the northeast part of town, somehow, I had a garage door with a garage door opener. I would hit the button, door would open, back out, hit the button, door would close. Totally normal. I was backing out of the garage down the driveway, hit the button, the garage door started to close. It kind of shuddered a little bit and then it opened again. What is happening here? So I tried a couple more times. What's going on? And then I tried it one more time. Oh, it closed like normal. Next day, it happened once, and then it was fine. So I was going to close the door. It shudders a little bit. Try again. It worked. So it took me those 2 tries. It might have taken me a third. But I said, wait a minute. That's like when you block the door. So it doesn't crush a person, crush a pet. Maybe there's a car in the way, etc. So the door will stop closing and it'll open again. Totally normal. So one of the ways it does this is there's a sensor, optical sensor, that so a beam of light will fire from one side of your garage door entry, and it'll hit a sensor on the other side, and if you break that beam, it assumes that there's a person or a pet or something. So open the door. Turns out, so the light receptor, the light sensor, was on the right side as you're pulling into the garage, and it turns out the sun was setting, and the sunlight was going directly into that sensor, triggering it. I don't know why. I don't know why that would cause a problem. You would think the fact that the light is shining into it would be okay, but no. Sunlight entering that sensor would cause a problem. So I tested this by the next day. I went out as the sun was setting, and when you're standing there, when you're not in a car, you can kind of see how I can see the light is coming in at this angle. Try to close the door, it doesn't close. Block the sunlight, close the door, it closes fine. Unblock the sunlight, doesn't close. Problem solved. Just don't leave the house during that 30-second period where the sunlight is hitting the sensor. That's one of those things. It could be something where I would have called a repair person and they would have come out and they would have said, I don't know what it is, because they came out at 4:00 in the afternoon or whatever. It's just one of those things. You'd probably get charged a trip charge at least, and maybe they would replace a sensor or who knows what. But debugging is sometimes a practical matter of figuring out what's going on, and then you learn something. And that's rarely a bad thing. Why is this important? If you encounter some of the everyday issues I listed as examples, or any number of tons more, or your own odd circumstance where something is not working as you expect it to. So I can't think of everything, obviously. What do you do? In these modern times, you can search with Google, or I guess now you would just ask ChatGPT, why is my garage door not working? And it'll say, I'm an artificial intelligence. I'm only current up until October, blah, blah, blah. Look around for a subreddit maybe that might apply our garage doors. Visit your favorite microblog site, X, or I feel like Twitter, or X, whatever you want to call it. Blue Sky, maybe something cooler on the Fediverse. Or generally cast a net as wide as you can and see if anyone else has encountered the same issue and perhaps they've solved it already or located a potential solution. Maybe they'll say, oh, I read this article. Oh, there's a tech support website for that they, whatever. If you have no idea what the problem might be, you may need to accept a potential solution and hope for the best. Somebody might say, oh, type your password into here. Those are always good. Trust can be tricky, and you are probably trusting someone you have never met and do not know to provide some advice that may not actually work and which may actually make your situation worse. They could do harm. They could steal your credentials, your passwords. They could break into your bank account. Who knows? Who knows what when you accept assistance from the internets and it has to do with touching certain things. One of the favorite, like nobody really talks about this, Anything that says, oh, just copy and paste this into a, so-and-so, whatever, those are always problematic, or they're at least worth investigating. If you copy something from the internet, like you take your mouse cursor and you highlight a block of something, like just copy this and paste it in and hit return, and there could be hidden characters, there could be Unicode, maybe the style sheet has made some text, invisible on the screen, so when you copy it, it's not, you don't see it initially, but so you got to look out for that kind of stuff and just be careful, because this may be new to you. You may be doing something you're not familiar with. So debugging is not always something you're starting off with knowledge. Sometimes you got to feel your way through. Be careful. You may find enough information from these online community discussions to learn what the cause is, or could be, so that you can become that much wiser concerning your vehicle, your dessert recipe, or your mobile phone. Before or after you find this new information, you may have been interested and curious enough to look for actual documentation of some specific details that could be causal, so that when you start to find potential solutions, you'd be able to make that connection. You'd say, oh yeah, I think I read about something where, if the battery gets too hot, it'll shut the phone down, which is true. This is part of debugging. It's part of the debugging process, finding out how your system is supposed to work, so you have some idea where to begin your investigations, especially when it is not working. So let's take a dessert recipe example. So that's fairly generic. Most people have baked something, have prepared a cake, muffins, something like this. So not everybody is a computer hardware debugger or whatever. Nobody's asking you to learn a new skill for this audio program. So hopefully you've made a cake or some other dessert. Maybe your grandmother handed down a recipe she received from her grandmother to you for some cookies or a cheesecake or something like this. Imagine it is your own favorite legacy dessert that you yourself have been making for years. You never really got into the details, why a certain amount of baking powder, why a certain amount of sugar, why mix separately and then fold it together, whatever the recipe has directed. You were just doing that. However, at some point many years ago, you decided to experiment a little bit, changing quantities, replacing ingredients, adding and subtracting, and eventually it would be barely recognizable to your grandmother. Ship of Theseus. See what I did there? One day you prepare your dessert as you have been for how many long? Who knows how long? I got to fix that typo. As you have been for who knows how long. But today something is wrong. Maybe terribly wrong. It tastes awful. It looks weird. It didn't rise. It rose too much. Something has not gone as it always has previously. It's always fine, and then today it's not. Maybe you need it for an event or party or something. The clock is ticking. What's going on? This whole thing is going to have to get tossed out to start over. Hopefully the party is tomorrow. Why did this iteration of a dessert you have made countless times fail? If you call your grandmother, if she's still around, or maybe others to whom she has passed this legacy recipe, they might have some thoughts, but your recipe is not the same anymore. In fact, it might be quite different. So how will you figure out what went wrong? This is where debugging comes in everywhere, including dessert. It's what's for dessert. So how might this work? Obviously, the first step is to make sure the ingredients have not been compromised. One bad egg can spoil the whole thing. That is a good start. Are your core ingredients okay, like baking soda, baking powder, sugar, flour, salt, and the mainstays of any baked item, whatever else there might be in there, or any items you may have modified in your own version of this recipe? Are they all okay? Have your pans and bowls, are they clean? Were they clean when you started? Was there maybe something growing in there? Maybe. Who knows? Did you use water or milk? Are they okay? Was something in the water? Was the milk churned? I actually purchased some half and half a couple weeks ago. It was well within the sell-by date. And I'm thinking it was in 2 days. It was held at the correct temperature in the refrigerator. 2 days later, it was almost like chunky. It was awful. It's as though it were a month after the date, not a week before it. It was awful. So yeah, these things can happen. Any oils that may have churned, maybe bad butter. Who knows? Bad butter. That sounds like a band. You can walk down the ingredient list and test each one. This has actually happened, by the way. The eggs especially can really throw a wrench into your plans. It happened with a cheesecake one time. It was awful. Once it was cooked, it looked like something from another planet. Didn't work. It might be that your own ingredient stash had an issue. Maybe some ingredients you had were too long on the shelf or not held at the correct temperature. But what if one or more ingredients ran into a supply chain issue? Or like my half and half, just who knows what was happening there. The date was wrong when they stamped it or what happened. So that may, and the bonus for that half and half thing, I actually had purchased another, it was like a half-gallon container because it was cheaper than getting like a quart. So Shamrock half and half is good. Smith's, Kroger, whatever, half and half. Oh, yikes. So I had purchased one, and then a couple days later I purchased another one. I don't know, I think they were on sale or something. I said, I'll have another one in there. I still got plenty of time before the sell-by date, and half usually lasts pretty well. It's pretty good. But no, both of these, marked with the same sell-by date, went bad before the sell-by date was reached. So this is probably a supply chain issue, or somewhere in the supply chain they stamped the date incorrectly or something. Something may have been in the half and half when they were mixing it up to package it. Who knows? Who knows what was going on? Maybe in the larger supply chain issue, though, that's always a concern. Sometimes it doesn't make the news. Did you switch to a different brand that is not a direct replacement? Maybe it reacts differently with other ingredients. You might need to try swapping some items out and remaking variations on your own recipe to see if there is variations on a theme, variations on your recipe, to see if it can return to normalcy. One example of ingredients changing is red dye number 5, for example. I think that's starting to happen now. The red dye number 5 is a chemical and it's not healthy. It's been disallowed in the EU forever. So if you go with fruit flavorings, fruit dyes, the flavoring might be slightly different, but you end up with a natural dye that doesn't last as long, but it's natural. And I've seen a report. It was a review, like a comparative review of, I believe it was Fruit Loop cereal, and one was made with the fruit colorings, and one was artificial. And they said the fruit colorings were actually quite a bit better. Like wow, we should have been doing this 50 years ago. So, but that's important to know that the ingredients that you've been using this whole time, something may have changed. Another ship of Theseus circumstance, perhaps, where, it's the same exact thing every time. And wait, no, it isn't. It's actually made of raspberries now instead of red dye number 5. So you never know. You got to sometimes investigate these things. That's part of debugging. So this was a contrived but mostly valid example. Obviously, it's vague and invented. It's only an example to illustrate debugging, but it was mostly valid. If you were really serious about making sure your dessert turns out, maybe you prepare these at a home business, or maybe you are actually making batches for a dessert retailer or wholesaler. I mean, it's your business maybe, or you're part of a business. Knowing the root cause is a actual business concern. One bad cake or batch of cookies or something, you got to deal with that. A whole day's worth of work has to be thrown away. No good. A whole day's worth of items that have already shipped out to customers. So that's a catastrophe. Maybe it's simply something you want to get to the bottom of, but obviously the scale or the weight of the issue goes up if you're sending it out to customers, or if your business relies on this, or if there's any risk of a food allergy, for example, from an ingredient change, et cetera, et cetera. So getting to the bottom of it is usually the bare minimum. Like, why did my stuff not work? Why is my food awful? It normally isn't, but that's usually there's more to it. Generally speaking, if we encounter something that always works, but suddenly does not work, we probably want to figure out why it's not working. Just the way it was like a minute ago, or last week, or yesterday, or so hey, this was working. This example is basically what you might do. So baked items, people that bake a lot have a better sense because it's just practice, and you'll know when things are wrong, and that's the debugging skill that's developed over time. You say, oh wait, the eggs smell funny. The consistency of the baking soda is weird. I don't know if that ever happens, but it could, I suppose. Why is the salt strange, right? Why is it clumpy, or why some moisture got in there? What's going on? So there's always a possibility that that's something that you didn't notice because you only cook once a year will become super noticeable if you cook every day. And this is just how debugging works. If something you do frequently suddenly doesn't behave, you have a lot more data. I know yesterday everything was fine. If you only if you only cook once a year, you have to say, well, I know last year everything was fine. So the more frequently you're doing things, the more noticeable sudden changes are, the more reference you have for what was working, what wasn't, and so on. There's an expression that you should always check your breast pocket, probably more for guys. Always check to make sure your wallet, pat your pockets down. If you carry a purse, you can check your purse. So it doesn't really matter. The breast pocket thing is from suit coats, but in general, the more often you check, you know that you had your keys the last time you did that, and you do it all the time. So you're like, oh, I know I just had my keys 2 minutes ago because I'm frantically smacking my pockets. But the more often you do these things, the more aware you are when things seem off. And that is ultimately helpful. And then the more often these things happen in those circumstances, the more likely you are to sort of dial in on something. If your dessert turned out weird and you're like, you know what? It's probably that vanilla, that natural vanilla flavoring I added was probably sitting on the shelf for just too long, or whatever, right? You'll have a sense because you've been doing this for a while. And that just is how debugging is. The noise your car is making, if you're an automobile mechanic, or if you've just been around cars enough, you say, oh, you know what that is? And then they'll tell you. I don't know what it might be. Haven't had a car in a while, but what's that metallic sound? Oh, that's pinging. That's what pinging sounds like when your timing is wrong or your fuel mixture is off. Like, oh, and then and then from now on, what pinging sounds like. So these are the sorts of things that you gain this knowledge by experience. And then the more often you come across these things, the more likely you are to quickly associate some sort of weird behavior, unexpected, strange, broken, with a potential cause, or what we call a root cause. Where am I? Yeah. So generally speaking, if we encounter something that always works but suddenly does not work, we probably want to figure out why it is not working, as it was just a minute ago. So that's what I was saying already. There are a few factors. Like you may not have a recipe or blueprints or source code for the thing that is not working. So you have to be more creative, more intuitive. You will probably lean more on others and on the internet at large. At large, by the way, not writ large. People overuse that incorrectly. The internet at large to track down a root cause, or maybe just a workaround to get you up and running. Like in a pinch, you can use something else, or you can, if this happens, it might be that. Right, so it's a place to start, or it might get you up and running to to at least finish your dessert for tomorrow's event or whatever. Like, oh, you just it's probably your eggs. Go and get some new eggs and try, make sure they're all good, and whatever it is, you can try to get back to your schedule or what you're trying to do, or make your phone work again. You can find out at least if you're doing more damage by not fixing it. Is that noise my car makes when I go over a bump? Is that a bad thing? Like, no, it's the jack in the spare tire holding area. Production by street. It looks like it got loose and it's making a noise. Okay, so there's all sorts of things that you just sort of pick up through your travels. If you do find a workaround or some blind answer that doesn't really inform you so much as address the problem at hand, so it might just get you up and running. It's a Band-Aid. It's a fix that works for now, but not really a solution to the problem. You will not necessarily have become more familiar with the thing so that you can address it next time. If there is a next time, there is a difference between fixing the problem and understanding the problem to fix it. So how stuff works. I talk about this all the time. Knowing how stuff works is important. And in an ever more complicated world, there are more and more things going on around us that do not make sense. And so they happen without our being able to fully comprehend their impact. Like if something doesn't work and you say, oh, well, I don't know what's going on there. And then 2 hours later, your house is burned down. Not funny, but since I've been in a house fire, although not long, I got out of that house fire. It's something to laugh about, sort of. Sometimes the impact is bad and it will do us harm, financial, physical, or who knows. If we have no idea how these things work or how they are supposed to work, we have no basis for argument if we are concerned about what happens next. This is true of most things we learn about in the news today or via YouTube or TikTok or Reels, perhaps wherever you consume your, I will put news in air quotes, where we are not quite sure what is happening or why, but maybe we do not like it, or maybe we do. And that is as far as we go with to understand what's going on. When we understand something enough to assess issues, to repair problems, or make improvements, we're in a far better position to explain it to others or to make decisions about how we want to interact with or rely upon whatever that thing is. Once we know the ins and the outs of our modified dessert recipe, for example, and we know how different ingredient risks can be mitigated, like make sure your eggs are at the correct temperature and make sure you don't crack them into the mixing bowl, crack them into a ramekin, each one, and make sure they're okay before you put them in. You learn that the second or third time. We can feel confident about using this recipe whenever we need to because we understand our ingredients and we understand how they work. We understand what to keep an eye out for. We understand what possible interactions to look out for if we change ingredient sources. And we'll be absolutely certain if someone cannot consume some of its ingredients. That's a great way to be sure, is to know what's going into your recipe, desserts, and so on. We know exactly what they are and how they interact, those ingredients. So if somebody cannot have gluten or somebody cannot have onions, or hopefully you're not putting onions in your dessert. But gluten is a common one. If you're cooking your dessert with a wheat flour, right away this has wheat in it. If you cook with almond flour but you put peanuts in it, then you might be aware that somebody with a peanut allergy would be impacted by that. So knowing, and those are the kind of problems you don't want to have to debug. You want to know them ahead of time so you can share that information. But when you know how something is built or what the ingredients are that went into it, or how it functions, this is where you are able to address problems or answer questions. You just know how your thing works, whatever the thing is. It could be food, it could be a phone, it could be your startup company, it could be a game you're playing, it could be anything. If we rely on what other people tell us rather than understanding our systems for ourselves, we are subject to manipulation around an agenda, or worse. We could be scammed, we could be distracted, we could be misled in any number of ways because we do not understand what we are being told, what we are being sold. I have an example of a debug. It wasn't really a debug. I mean, it was kind of a debug. It was the same exact process. You do something similar if you're trying to reverse engineer something. So like, how does it work? I was working at UMax Computer Corporation, and I was working on our PowerPC machines. We had an update for our existing hardware. This was before I actually was working with the company. They had upgradable Mac clones, Mac compatible hardware that would run the Macintosh operating system at the time. And the processor cards were plugged in on these little zero insertion force sockets that would plug into the motherboard, and so everything was fine. We were subject to the constraints of the Macintosh ROM and so on, so we had to figure out, in this case, we had Arthur PowerPC 603E processors, which were the first parts to include a backside cache. Now every computer has these. Nothing new there. But at the time, it was kind of revolutionary. Like, oh, this thing adds some serious performance. So in order to ship our update, we had to sell this new product. And in order to get the new product to function, it had to be initialized. It had to be configured in the computer. And the computer that we sold, a year, 2, 3 before that, had no idea, of course. It was not sold with this in mind. So there was no mechanism in there to turn on the backside cache, the extra memory that would make the processor and hence everything else run fast. Ooh, wicked fast. That's a famous quote by somebody, but we'll leave it there. So my task was figure out how we can bring this to Apple for qualification so that they will let us sell this as a legitimate product. We can't hack the Mac ROM. We can't do a bunch of things. So we have to follow the rules, but we also have to enable this thing. So what the deal was, if any of you are Mac people, you know that the Macintosh had a 68,000 processor at one point, and then they switched to PowerPC, and there was an emulator. So some things ran as old 68K code, some things ran as new PowerPC code. So PowerPC has what's called Ring 0 or supervisor mode. I think it's actually supervisor mode. So there's like normal mode and supervisor mode. In order to configure the backside cache on the PowerPC 603E, codename Arthur, you had to be in PowerPC supervisor mode to adjust the registers for the backside cache memory sizing and timing. But guess what? Apple did not just let you drop into supervisor mode. That's too much. That's too too friendly to their developers. So you had to start off in 68K emulator mode. Now, what could we do with that? So I had a oscilloscope on the lab bench, and I could trace through the code as it was executing. Their debugger, the MaxBug debugger, would famously jump around this code that was essential. I was trying to figure out how they were initializing some PowerPC supervisor registers in general in their code. So, they were trying to hide it from me. And eventually, I did track down, took a while, took like a whole day. I think I had like 4 days to do it. I think I said this. So I found out, and as luck would have it, I actually interviewed with Gary Davidian, the inventor of the emulator, the first version of the emulator. It was just a vector table, but the first version of the emulator, Gary Davidian, I didn't know his birthday, but I was able to find that out. But I could see the code. I could see the numbers being pushed. So you would load Gary as ASCII into one register on the 68000 emulated processor. You'd load his birthday into another. I didn't know it was his birthday at the time, but so Gary and birthday, Gary's birthday. And then you would execute a processor trap, and you would have a routine at the trap handler that would execute your instructions in PowerPC supervisor mode. So there you go. So I wrote this init, if you remember Macintosh system inits, and I was done in the 4-day time constraint. So I knew a lot more about how everything worked after that little adventure. So next time I had anything even touching that, anything even close to relating to the emulator and dropping into supervisor mode, I knew where to start. I knew, basically the entryway, and I knew what to look for and so on. So debugging any problems like that became a little bit easier once I had that little extra bit of knowledge. I mentioned the pinging thing when I was I put a new engine in my Volkswagen Bug. That was a long story in itself, but I was in fact, it might have been before I put the engine in. Anyway, I didn't really know much about cars, so I was learning, and the Volkswagen Bug was a great platform on which to learn. As it happens, the person down the street who actually my parents bought it from, Chuck Ballou, had a Volkswagen repair shop, so he was actually a car mechanic. So I could go over there, and they'd put the car on the hoist, and they'd show me how stuff worked and everything. That was great. So one day I go in there and I say, my car is making noises like metal, almost like I can't even describe. Well, it's pinging is what it was. So if you know what pinging is, that was the sound, and I could only describe it as like, it sounds like metal being cut or like ground maybe. So one of the mechanics gets in the car. We drive up and down the street, and he's like, "Oh, okay, yeah." So we get out of the car. He makes sure that nothing is rattling. So he's like pulling on the fan housing, the fan shroud, and all that. And he's like, so it's not mechanical, so it's probably pinging. So we adjusted the timing, and that basically fixed it. That was it. So he knew what he was doing, and then as a result of that, now I knew what I was doing. So these little nuggets that you pick up through your travels. And the whole reason that this is interesting is that there are so many things in our ever more complicated world, as I said, that we fail to even try to grasp, or that we try to read up on or do any research on. So we often believe what we're told, or what we heard, or what we heard somebody tell us, or somebody told us that they heard something, and it's not accurate, or it has already changed. And then, of course, it already changed. How can you believe these things? Yeah, there's a lack of trust and so on. Sometimes what they told you was an incomplete fact that was still being developed, right? Our pandemic times are rife with this. Like, we're in a changing situation. You can never claim that something learned 2 months ago is going to be constant if things are changing, right? You have to accept that as a science person. Oh, you're not a science person. Okay, well, there you go. So that's where science explanation and science communication and all that come into play. But in general, you should kind of try to figure out how stuff works if it's going to be impactful on you, whether it's an illness or how a car works. Anti-lock brakes are a fun one. When anti-lock brakes were new, nobody knew what was going on there. Like, wow, my brake pedals just started bouncing around. You should understand how these systems work and how your local community works with its infrastructure, how our government works, what you should expect. The FEMA stuff was interesting. If you do know how FEMA works, then when people are making claims about these are loans and you have to pay it back, and like, no. Nope. So people can spread misinformation. Like I said, they might have an agenda. They might have some other reason to take advantage of you. Knowing how things work, or at least knowing where to look to know how things work, or having the desire to know how things work, or as I said earlier, how stuff works, will ultimately be beneficial and will help you to be more aware of your surroundings, and you will have a better feel for when something that might be a problem or a risk is something to actually be concerned about, and you might even know where to look to reduce or mitigate that risk. And that's important. So that's where I'm going to leave today's episode. Thank you so much for listening, as always. Don't forget, as I said at the top of the show, if you have a topic that I've already talked about, or if you have something on your own that you'd find interesting to discuss or debate, argument would be possible, but more likely a debate or conversation about what works, what doesn't, and what we might do about it. So by the way, what works is that there is information out there. What doesn't work is when people don't take the time to figure out and learn how their systems are working, and then they pay the price later. So what do we do about it is we encourage people to make use of the infinite piles of useful and correct information that are out there. Fortunately, you also have to learn how to wade through the distraction. But it is possible to figure out how things work if you want to. That is where I'm going to leave today's episode. Thank you so much for listening, as always. Take care. Bye-bye.